So that's Mark chapter 3, and we're looking at verse 7 to 19. But I'm just going to read the first part. There's two bits to this reading. You've first of all got a kind of continuation of Jesus' work, kind of generally speaking about what Jesus is doing while he is teaching and preaching and healing and doing all the other things that he's doing. So not a specific event, but just generally how he is with the people round about. And then the second section, which I'll spend maybe a little bit more time on, is where he appoints the 12 apostles or 12 disciples that are quite famous I guess even in the world, people would be quite aware of the 12 apostles. So we'll just read the first section, first of all, from verse 7 to verse 12 from Mark chapter 3. And it says this: Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the sea, and a great crowd followed from Galilee and Judea, and Jerusalem and Idumea, and from beyond all the Jordan, and from around Tyre and Sidon. When the great crowd heard all that he was doing, they came to him. And he told his disciples to have a boat ready for him because of the crowd, lest they crush him. For he had healed many, so that all who had diseases pressed around him to touch him. And whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." And he strictly ordered them not to make him known. And that'll be where we'll stop just for the moment. We'll read the second bit in just a second. This part here is again focusing on Jesus and his work. Now, last time I spoke, we were just starting off Mark, and we focused then on the first verse of Mark, which says the good news. Mark is writing, and he says this is the good news about Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And of course, we've got 4 Gospels, and the word gospel means good news. So Mark is saying this is the good news that I have to tell you about, and the good news concerns Jesus Christ. Of course, we're just singing with the kids there, weren't we, singing good news, Christ died for me. And of course, this is really the focus of all of Christianity, really. And every Christian, really, there's lots of information in the Bible, and there's lots of history, and there's wonderful things that we can read in the Bible, but the focus of the Bible is on Jesus Christ, and the focus of the Bible is on the good news that is brought to us by Jesus Christ. So what I want to do is just for a few minutes, just take this section that I've got here, and I want to think about Jesus Christ. And I want to think about what is the significance of Jesus Christ. Why is he so important? Why is this man, this carpenter who lived so many years ago, and for most of his life he was in obscurity. For most of his life he worked and he was with his family, and we don't really know all that happened to him. And then just for these final 3 years really is where we have the most information about him. Why is he so significant? So let's look at the passage we've got here. It said, and I'm jumping down to the end of the passage here, it said, whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried, "You are the Son of God." They fell down before him and cried, "You are the Son of God." Mark said the good news about Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And that's what makes him different. That's what makes him unique, because he is not a man like we are, not a man like every other man that's lived. Even as we look through our Bible and we see David and we see Samson and we see Moses and we see these great men in the Bible, but none of them are like Jesus, because Jesus, it says, is the Son of God. So the first thing that we learn about Jesus Christ is that he reveals God to us. When we think about Jesus as being the Son of God, we're not really meaning that he was kind of born of God in that way that we would think of sons. We're thinking that he displayed the characteristics of God. Later on, when it speaks about the apostles, it says that some of them are sons of thunder. That means that they were kind of acting like the thunder in a way. And Jesus Christ, when it speaks about him here as being the Son of God, he is displaying the characteristics of God because he is God. Now, you've maybe heard this analogy before, but I think it's very good. You perhaps know of the author J.K. Rowling, and she has written books. Harry Potter books are quite well known. So J.K. Rowling, the author, and the subject of her books is, of course, this little boy, Harry Potter. Now, J.K. Rowling knows Harry Potter, better than anybody. Yeah, I was trying to remember as I was sitting there, actually, there's a story I heard of somebody else, somebody will maybe remind me about it afterwards, of an author who'd written quite a famous book and it was made into a movie, and she was so upset because the movie didn't represent her character as she had written the character. Yeah, so J.K. Rowling knows Harry Potter. You might say, I know Harry Potter's a fictional character, but you might say that J.K. Rowling knows Harry Potter better than he knows himself. She has spent a lot of time thinking about this boy, Harry Potter. Before there was one book written, and there's a number of books, before there was even one book written, she was thinking about Harry Potter. He was in her mind. And I'm sure there was times to speak about it famously, don't they, in Edinburgh, they say, this cafe that she sat in and she wrote all of her books. And she sat there in the cafe and she's mulling over Harry Potter. She's thinking about him. She's thinking about how he's going to be, what sort of person he's going to be, how he's going to act, what sort of things are going to happen to him during his life. I want to just read you a few verses from Psalm 139. And in Psalm 139, David is thinking about the fact that God knew him before he was born. And he speaks about God knowing him when he was still in his mum's womb. In his mum's womb, he was known by God. And listen to this that David says. He says, "You knit me together in my mother's womb. Your eyes saw my unformed body." And listen to this. "All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. So in the same way as J.K. Rowling sat and mulled over Harry Potter and what was going to happen, what we're reading here in Psalm is that God did the same thing with you, and he did the same thing with me. Years before you were born, years before the world was created, years before there was anything on this earth, God was mulling over you and me and thinking about what our lives were going to be like and thinking about what was going to happen to us in our lives. And all the days ordained for us were written in his book before any of them came to be. So God knows us in that way better than we know ourselves. And the illustration I was using there was, of course, J.K. Rowling. She knows Harry Potter much better than he knows himself. But think about this. Harry Potter, I know this is a little bit strange because we're speaking about a fictional character. Harry Potter has got no concept of J.K. Rowling. He has got no idea that she exists. All he knows is the book that he's in. All he knows is the school and the friends and the family and these sort of things that are written in that book. That's all he knows. He doesn't know anything outside of that book. And she is outside of that book. She is in a completely different realm. She's in a completely different place. There is no way that he could know about her. No way at all. He doesn't have the capacity to know about her. He can't imagine anything outside of this book. He can't imagine anything outside of these pages. So if Harry Potter is going to become aware of J.K. Rowling, there's only one way it can happen. And that's if she writes herself into the story. So then you might have this Harry Potter's hanging about Hogwarts, and then J.K. Rowling walks through the door. If she writes herself into the story, then he can meet her. If she writes herself into the story, he can get to know her. That's what Jesus Christ is. Jesus Christ is God writing himself into our story. Because we wouldn't have had any concept of him if he didn't do that. We couldn't have considered him. We would have known nothing about him. We couldn't have even imagined him. We couldn't have related to him. He's in a realm outside of where we are. But now, he's written into our story, and we can understand him. He's in a way that we can understand. And this is what God does. This is what Jesus Christ is. This is God revealing himself to us. And we can see God and we can know God. So they called him. They said, the unclean spirit said, you are the Son of God. So one thing we could say about Jesus, one significant aspect about Jesus, is that he reveals God. Okay, what else does he do? If we looked here, it said that he has power over these unclean spirits. It says that they fall down. They fall down before him. So he's got authority over them. So the other thing we'll say about Jesus is, first of all, he reveals God, but Jesus is also going to remove evil from the world. If you think of this world as God's creation, God's the creator, and he's created this world, and it has become spoiled. Sin has spoiled the world. Is any creator going to leave their creation in that state? No. They're going to come and do something about it. And there's this badness, this sin that's in the world. God is going to remove this. And the Bible actually describes for us a day in the future when God will make everything new. And the world will be exactly as he had designed it to be. The world will function in exactly the way that he expected it to function before sin and the curse came into this world. And he is going to remove evil from his presence. So that's the second thing we see in this little passage here. He reveals God, he removes evil. There's one other thing he does. He restores men. It said in verse 10, and this is just generally describing what Jesus did. It said, he healed many, so that all who had diseases pressed around him to touch him. So he's healing many. Now, you need to think about this for a second. This world is inherently unjust. As we look around the world, is it the people who are in control? Are they the people who deserve to be there necessarily? Are the people who have easy lives and comfortable living, do they deserve that in some way? Do the people who have difficult lives and challenges in their life, did they do something wrong that caused them to have those challenges? No. The world is inherently unjust. And God is just, and he's going to fix that. He's going to deal with the sin in the world. But if God's going to deal with the sin in the world, what about the sin that's inside me? If I'm saying that God's going to come in a future day, God is going to remove sin from this world and make the world a perfect place again, what about the sin that's inside me? What about the fact that I'm not perfect? Well, that's a problem. Because if God's going to come and God's going to judge the world, he's going to judge my sin. If God's going to remove everything that's imperfect, he's going to remove me. That would be the right thing to do. That would be the just thing to do. So what's going to happen? God is going to heal my sin. Just in the same way as he healed these people who were sick. That's an illustration of the disease that's within us. They were diseased, but in a way we're diseased as well with this problem of sin. And Jesus Christ has come, and he has died for us. He has taken the punishment for our sin so that we can be forgiven, so that our sin can be forgiven. And our sin is dealt with by being forgiven, and we are made perfect in God's sight. To think of it, in the way the Bible describes it, it says that when Christ died, God saw us in him. God punished us in him. But God now looks on us and sees him in us. So his righteousness has become our righteousness. His perfection has become our perfection. So God is able to judge the world of sin, but is able to be merciful towards us. So in that first section there, we have three characteristics or three functions, three elements of Jesus Christ. Number one, he reveals God. Number two, he removes evil. And number three, he is going to restore men to God. Okay, let's go on to the next section and let's think about these 12 apostles, these famous 12 apostles. So I'll just read the verses from verse 13 to verse 19. It says this, "And he went up on the mountain and called to him those who he desired, and they came to him. And he appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, so that they might be with him, and he might send them out to preach and have authority to cast out demons. He appointed the 12, Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James the son of Zebedee, and John the brother of James, to whom he gave the name Boanerges, that is to say, sons of thunder, Andrew and Philip and Bartholomew and Matthew and Thomas, and James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him." 12 men. In quite a well-known book by John MacArthur, the book is titled 12 Ordinary Men. 12 ordinary men. And really, when I think of these 12 men, I would maybe say their simplicity or their ordinariness is the thing that really stands out. These were just regular people. Let's go down them. Peter, he surnames Simon, and he gave the kind of nickname of Peter, which means stone. He's maybe a little bit older than the others, not old by any, probably in his 20s. He's already married, whereas the next two, James and John, are probably just in their mid-teens. They're not really old at all. These guys, and Andrew is Peter's brother, so James and John are brothers, and then Andrew and Peter are brothers, and they both are fishermen, famously. I guess we know Jesus is walking by the seashore, and there they are in their boats, and he calls them to follow him. Peter's got his own business. I guess if you were to think of Peter in a kind of modern day, he's like a local tradesman, that sort of thing. He's got his own business. He's reasonably well off, I guess. He's not rich by any stretch of the imagination. Working class, salt of the earth type of person. James and John, similarly, they're working with their father. They're in their father's business, Zebedee and Sons, fishermen, and they are similarly working with him. And they've got this particular business that they can carry on, but then, of course, that day comes when Jesus comes and calls them, and they follow him. Now, they're not all fishermen, though. Another of the men mentioned here is Matthew. Matthew is a tax collector. He works for the Romans. We heard about him just a couple of weeks ago when he was called, and he was actually sitting at his work. It's an interesting thing. So were the other disciples. So were Peter and James and John. They were actually at their work. Ordinary day for them. And they got called. If I was to give a kind of comparison to Matthew, I would probably call him a kind of... there was a term used when there was the banking crash. People used to speak about fat cats and bankers. People who had become wealthy, but they had very questionable morals, was the suggestion. It's not a judgment on any person's role. That's just what people said. So the idea is that they had become wealthy, but they'd become it in a way which wasn't really acceptable to society. That's where Matthew is. He's working for the Romans. He's working for the enemy, but he's making lots of money. And he's become very wealthy as a result. But he's quite different from, Peter and Andrew and James and John. What about Philip? Philip's a Greek name. That means that he was probably born into a family that was Hellenistic Jews. That is, that they didn't really accept their Jewish roots. They were happier to live more as Greeks. They're very modern living, very kind of modern and current in their outlook. That was the lifestyle that Philip was brought into. Whereas some of the other disciples were followers of John. They were quite religious in a way. So some of them were quite religious. Philip's family probably not quite religious. Simon the Zealot. Simon the Zealot. The Zealots were effectively terrorists. They were trying to overcome the Roman government by things like assassination and so on. So they would, you could compare Simon today to something like an IRA militant or Al-Qaeda or something like that. That's exactly what he was like. And he's one of these 12 as well. So we've got a mixed bag of people here. Yeah? We've got and some of them are quiet, some of them don't have much to say, some of them have got lots to say, some of them, are followers, some of them are leaders. They're different in that sense. Yeah? But they're ordinary men. There were thousands of other men like them. There were thousands of other fishermen. There were thousands of other tax collectors, thousands of other zealots, lots of people like this. And they don't stand out in that sense. None of them are kings. None of them are military generals. None of them are spiritual gurus. Nothing like that. They're ordinary men. They're not even particularly brave, because when we find that Jesus is arrested, they all run. So we find they've not even got a particular amount of courage. So there we have these ordinary men, and they've been called, and they came. They came when they were called. But they're significant as well, because actually it tells us in Acts, when they're speaking about them, it says these men have turned the world upside down. So how did these 12 men from absolutely ordinary backgrounds, men that we can all relate to, how did they turn the world upside down? The historian Tom Holland, in his book Dominion, said that Christianity, the introduction of Christianity to the world, changed the world beyond recognition. And still today, maybe 30% of the world identify as Christians from these 12 men. Yeah, that was our starting point, these 12 men. So there was a simplicity to them, but there was a significance to them. But how did that come about? Well, I want you to look at verse 13, I've called their surrender. He went up on the mountain and called to him those he desired, and they came to him. They responded to his call. We've already kind of seen that already in the follow me, and they followed after him. But the point is that they responded to his call. And the message of the gospel is something that requires a response. Jesus is asking us to follow him. Jesus is asking us to take him as Lord, and it requires a response. There was crowds. We saw there in the first section, there was crowds following Jesus. Many, many people. And why were they following him? They had a kind of passing interest. They were intrigued by him. They thought, this is interesting. This guy's doing all these things. Maybe he was giving them things. He was giving them food sometimes. He was feeding the 5,000. They're thinking, this is quite good. I quite like what I'm getting out of this. But they didn't follow him like these men followed him. They were just kind of had an interest in him. They didn't take him as their Lord. These guys made him the focus of their lives. To Peter gave up his business because he said, there's something more important than fishing. Matthew had lived his life for money. He was trying to earn as much as he could, and he would do any way he could. But he said, there's something more important than money. And he followed him. And Romans tells us, if you confess with your mouth Jesus as Lord, and believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And there's that idea of taking him as Lord, following after him. People follow men all the time and are influenced by men all the time, but men will fail us. But to follow Christ is to know true happiness. Like our hymn in starting said, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. Now, just in closing, I'll just pick up three things that it says about these disciples when they followed him. They were called to a life of purpose. They weren't called to an easy life. Their life would have been easier, in all honesty, staying at the fishing or staying at wherever they were. They would have an easier life if they did that. They didn't have an easy life. They all gave their lives. They all ultimately died for this belief, for following the Lord Jesus Christ. But their lives Though they weren't easy, their lives were significant, and their lives had purpose, and their lives had meaning. And what was that meaning? Well, it tells us that he appointed the 12, and he said, first of all, he appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, so that they might be with him. And that's the primary purpose of a believer. The primary purpose of a Christian is this relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ, to grow with him and to get to know him and to develop that relationship with him through our kind of reading and prayers. This is not a religion. That's not what we're promoting here. We're not promoting kind of church attendance or good living or anything like that. We're promoting a relationship with Jesus Christ, a relationship with God. And that's what he said these disciples could do, that they might be with him. And then he sent them out to preach. And there's another thing that they're going to do. Romans 10 that we just read there says, if you will confess with your mouth. So you're expected then to witness. You're expected then to tell others. Right down from that verse in Romans it says, and how will they believe? Speaking about the world outside. There's a world outside that knows nothing about the Lord Jesus Christ. And Romans says, how will they believe in whom they have not heard? And how will they hear without a preacher? And we've all got a circle of influence, a circle of people that we're aware of. And how will those people hear? How will they hear about the Lord Jesus Christ unless it is through us telling them? And then finally, it says he's going to give them authority to cast out demons. You know, earlier in the passage, he had authority over demons, but now he's giving them that authority. And what we find in the Bible is that we are expected to become more like Jesus. In the scriptures, he is described as the light of the world, but then we're described as the light of the world. He says, you're the light of the world. And we're expected to kind of act in this way, act like he acts. There was one disciple there, of course, Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him, it said. And what that tells us is that it was possible for somebody to go along with the disciples and do all the things the disciples did. And to everyone looking on, you were the same as all the others. But he wasn't the same inside. And he'd never taken Christ as his Lord. He still valued wealth, money, and gain higher than the Lord Jesus Christ. And I guess that's a warning as we finish there. But as we are encouraging ourselves, we think of this idea that we are called for a purpose to be with him, a purpose to tell others about him, to make him known, and a purpose to be like him as well.